I'm Cody with K. I am a manager of the product content experience team at Cloudflare, and here to talk about something that I think a few other folks have hit up, kind of how we use AI and other things to automate documentation maintenance at Cloudflare. So just taking in the agenda a little bit, going to go through a little bit of framing the problem, a little bit of our documentation context, and then from there, kind of a few suggestions about how to approach it, how we approach it, which I think makes sense with the context that we have. So framing the problem. This is a screenshot from one of our team critique meetings where we kind of bring in like, hey, what's working? What do we need to update? What do we need to talk about? Rambel and Denise, two members of our team, are saying, hey, like we had these placeholders on our API site. We updated docs to match these. And then the API site changed their placeholders on us. Do we want to align ours to match what the API site is doing now? And so on the surface of it, like it's an obvious yes. Like we want to be consistent. We should align across Cloudflare. That's, something that we all want to do. But, I'm a writer. That new feature is shipping out next week, and I have to finish an entirely new section. I want to replace those placeholders, but someone just tagged me in a chat room about an incorrect example that's causing errors. I want to do that, but an engineer just chatted me asking if I could look at their docs PR and provide some feedback on it. And so it's really hard to fit those maintenance level tasks in. Like even when I describe our role to other people at Cloudflare or talk to a new member on the team, this is how I think of us organizing our time. We sit within the product organization, and so we care about what product managers care about, which are new features, which is why they're the biggest bucket in kind of our time block. We have a bunch of other projects, so maybe that's writing a new tutorial, maybe that's doing a bunch of consolidation and reworking. That's around 30%, and then maintenance ends up being about 10%. And so what that can mean is stuff like that, that API placeholder gets pushed down the line. And then unfortunately, sometimes you end up with, docs that kind of look like this. You want like a beautiful snowman and you're kind of stuck with these dirty balls of snow. And when you don't have enough time to work on maintenance, it's something where you get away from skeletons in the closet and they gradually come out into plain sight, and that's not what you want. And so honestly, like a question I've been borderline obsessed with in about my 4 or 5 years at Cloudflare is really like, how do we cheat at maintenance? How do we find better ways to address this? How do we use automation or other things to multiply our effort where we can get way more than 10% of value out of that 10% of work? And as I was trying to think through the organization for this talk and think about like how we do this and how we approach it and what's a framework to provide, I was being interrupted very persistently by my daughter. She's 9 months old and just such a joy. But she is not very not very helpful. I'm trying to think about this problem. How do I frame it? What do I use? And then finally the answer, like totally unprompted, came to me. Dada. And like hopefully that's like silly and dumb enough that it sticks in your mind, but it's kind of the way that I'm going to frame this talk of document, automate, democratize, and AI. and that's kind of the way that I've organized my thinking about kind of how we approach documentation maintenance. Okay, so that's kind of the solution. Let me take you into a little bit about how we do docs at Cloudflare. We have a lot of content. Our docs live at developers.cloudflare.com. We have over 5,000 pages, which is probably too much. And that's only English content. It includes a whole bunch of different types of content. We get a lot of traffic. This is actually just from the month of May, not a year, just 1 month. Got about 5 million page views, 1.5 million unique users, about 250,000 people come to us from Google. Okay, that is a month. We also have a lot of contributions. This is actually a slow month in our repo, and we merged in 374 pull requests, 128 authors. It's a lot of activity happening. And on top of that, we have a small but mighty team. We have content designers, so kind of I like to think of them as the people who deal with words in small spaces. I know that they do so much more than that, but that's the way that makes sense for me. We have video production managers, which is a little bit unique for a docs team. We have an engineer, and then we also have a team of technical writers. Shameless plug, I'm hiring for a tech writing role in Lisbon or London. Just drop that role in the chat. If you are interested in that, you think you'd be a good fit, submit your application. I would love to talk. Shameless plug for that. And then finally, feel free to take a screenshot of this slide. I'm going to go through it pretty fast. I think the biggest takeaway is you could be running your doc site like ours for free or relatively low cost. We host our site on Workers, and that is an Astro site that has the Starlight documentation framework on top of it that gives you some documentation specific components. We use Algolia Doc Search, which if you're an open source repo is available for free. We host our content in GitHub. For analytics, we use a Cloudflare tool to send stuff to different locations. And then the one like super enterprisey part of it is we have a subdomain set up. Happy to answer questions about that in the future or LinkedIn or whatever, but moving on here. Okay, so into the solution of how we approach this. So the spoiler of this is the name of the talk is called Beyond Style Guides. But surprise, style guides are still very important. We have ours at developers.cloudflare.com/style guide. And I'll also drop that link into the chat here. And so the point of the style guide, I think the two first points here are pretty common and understood. It's great to have things aligned on what you do as a team. It's also good to have defaults so you aren't starting from scratch all the time, especially in an open source environment like ours. We sometimes have stakeholders who are a lot more involved in the process. So sometimes it's helpful to tell them, hey, here's how you do things. And also, dear God, why did you do it that way? we don't do it that way. I think the two underutilized parts of style guides are kind of effortful thought. So why do you make the decisions that you do? And then the pain scale. So when those things go wrong, what is the consequence? What is the pain associated with them? And so this is a shot from Silicon Valley in the scene, like Richard and his girlfriend are arguing about like how they indent their code, whether it's tabs or spaces. And I'm sure that you probably had this conversation on your team, or you have something in your style guide about what you prefer. But just take it a little bit deeper and think about why it matters beyond alignment. And the why in this case is because if you have differing standards or not everybody follows it, it can really like clutter up the diff in a PR and hide like the actual changes that are happening amongst just all this formatting. So that's kind of an example of like thinking through deeper, thinking through the pain, which I think is a good jumping into the next part of the solution. Automate, also known as fix what bugs the shit out of you. That's at least how I think about it. One of my least favorite things, and I'm sure for you all, is checking links in a preview to make sure they resolve correctly. Like that is, oh man, like shoot me now. I do not want to do that. It's not a good use of my time. It is just like such a mind killer to actually go through and do that. And so when you think through automation, I think a good way of framing it is, what do people commonly mess up? What is repetitive and mind-numbing, in the parentheses of what can computers usually evaluate pretty well? And what would cause you to revert the PR or have to jump on an immediate fix? Those are the things to focus on automation. So we automate in two main ways. Also, feel free to screenshot this one. I'm going to go through it a little bit fast. We use GitHub Actions pretty heavily. And so of that, we have kind of different layers of checks on every build and every PR. On the left side here, we have kind of what are the required checks. So what would cause us to say, hey, somebody broke the build. So does the doc site work? Did we put in any infinite redirects? Do all of the links that we know about, so anything within our documentation site, those are addressed automatically. And then we have some specific checks for certain pages and actions. Let me also drop it in. And again, like all of these are visible because we're an open source repo. They're all visible at the link that I shared below, hopefully with enough context to understand them. I'm going to take you into one of these periodically as needed checks and a little bit of the thought behind it. So we look for unused images, and the reason why we look for that is somebody uncovered an API key, an exposed API key in one of our screenshots, and so I voluntarily spent about 6 hours going through and looking. Okay, does this screenshot have an API key? No. Move on to the next one. Like it was pretty mind-numbing and pretty painful. And then the worst part of it was at the end of it, I realized, oh wait, we aren't even referencing some of these. Why are these in our repo in the first place? So that's where the pain came from. What we do is we have a GitHub action called, I think, unused images or something like that. It looks through, evaluates the paths, creates a GitHub issue saying, here are all the images that we don't have in our repo. And you can just go through and delete them as a technical writer. And you might be saying, oh, look, what if I delete something extra? What if there's another image that I accidentally delete that causes an issue? Well, we check for that, so you can't. As long as our compiles check passes, whereas a lot of the heavy lifting in our automation is, every image that is referenced has a valid path. And so the goal is, hey, we're going to automate it, but we're also going to try and make it as easy as possible for you to do the right thing as a tech writer. The other part of automation that I don't know if it's been thought of or framed of this way as much is in our components. We, again, as I mentioned, we have an Astro site, which means we have probably too many custom components. And those are kind of bucketed into 3 different groups. One is formatting, one is content reused, one is centralized or external sources of truth. And I'll just take you into how one of these solved this problem. So again, we go back to what I started with. Hey, we have the wrong placeholders in our URLs. So we decided to approach this and several other problems with a component instead of a style guide. So we have a component called API request, which you can definitely find at the link above. And basically what it does is on the left side here, you pass in I have this path and this method and maybe some optional other information. We grab a bunch of information for you from our Open API schema, including, hey, what is the full path to this? Does this link exist in this component? What are the permissions involved? And so we validate that you're using the right path, the permissions, so you don't have to worry about putting those in and then updating those over time and how we're going to know when they change. And then we also take care of all the formatting for you. And so the goal with this is like, hey, yes, we have these style guidelines, but can we make somebody opt into them better? And so it's used pretty heavily now across our docs. I think as of today, it might be up to 250 times on however many pages, but quite heavily used. And in my mind, this is kind of the platonic ideal of how to maybe enforce a style guide, but you're not actually enforcing it. And so one of the earlier speakers talked about this. I would just like to echo and repeat this. AI is very, very good actually at GitHub Actions or like CI/CD jobs. They're small, discrete pieces of code. There's a lot of documentation on them on the internet. And so I think wrote about 50% of our GitHub Actions just with ChatGPT. Very helpful. It did take a little bit of pain and tinkering to get it to work, but that's great. Our Astro components are about 25% made with AI. But yeah, just thought I'd talk through just kind of how that ties in. So democratize. Let me go into, so I mentioned before the content design part of our team. They are the folks who are dealing with UI journeys, UI text, API descriptions, anything where we need a little bit more attention to make sure that that content is meaningful. They're a really small team. They deal with a lot of content in Cloudflare's dashboard and elsewhere. And so what they decided to do, and this is led by someone I like to call the Cloudflare Alexa, what they decided to do is, hey, can we just empower engineers to handle this themselves? So they built a tool that basically evaluates different types of messages, gives you a score, and then gives you a recommendation as to how to improve that. And they called it CLUE, which is content legibility for user ease, because who doesn't love a good acronym? And so that's kind of a screenshot of what it looks like. On the left side, you kind of select the type of message, put in your thing, generate the score, and then it provides you, hey, here's how this stacks according to what we might expect. And also here's some recommendations for it. And we have different checks as part of this, kind of from more specific to least specific. So starting with word lists, just we use these phrases, we don't use these phrases. It also takes into a bunch of regex checks. And then as was mentioned before, AI is actually very good in situations where regex gets too complicated. And so this is kind of a screenshot of what like some of those prompts look like for an AI rule. This is actually the one that I failed in my error message. I did not provide an explanation as to why the error occurred. So I actually have an open question. This is a tool that we built that's internal. It's kind of gated on an internal URL. Is this something that y'all would like to see out there or might be interested in us publishing? It's just a curiosity point of mine and something that is we're evaluating, like where we take this. That's kind of an open question. Okay, so the last part of we talked through document, audit, democratize. AI, it's a verb now. So I want to take you through like how we tested out AI specifically for content maintenance. So let me go through what hasn't worked, what sort of worked, and what's really worked. So what hasn't worked, content improvement. We've had a couple of engineers try to push up PRs saying, hey, like AI help me like rewrite this page and make it clear. Here's a screenshot of that diff. That's a lot of additions. And then kind of this is just a screenshot of like my conversation with the engineer who pushed this up. Hey, like this is different. Like, why is that? Or this example changed. Is that still accurate? I think there's a better way to do this. I have notes actually from some of the other speakers today. Hasn't quite worked for us yet of a, like this is a 5-minute change that somebody made. It's going to take me 30 minutes to review it and then 4 hours to audit it. Hasn't saved us a bunch of time yet. What hasn't worked also, content review. We work together with a tool called Hyperlint to do 2 things, review PRs and then also submit automated fixes in our repo. It's really hard having certain stakeholders interact with the review bot, particularly if that review bot is wrong and very insistent. Again, there might be better ways to do this. We have just had issues with if it hallucinates on somebody, they get very annoyed and then come and complain at our team. And that's not like an experience that I want to have a lot. What sort of worked? Alerting. So this is an issue that Hyperlint raised in our GitHub repo saying, hey, an API spec changed. Go look at this associated documentation might have changed as well. I think actually the tool worked as it should. We just have so much content and are so overwhelmed with other things that we weren't able to act on this right away. So it got a little bit stale. So I think there's a lot of potential there, just haven't quite been able to operationalize it. Kind of in the same vein, agentic fixes. What we had is we used some Bear rules in conjunction with Hyperlint to basically try and automate our style guide through PR submissions. It's hit and miss. So in a lot of it is just the context of our docs isn't always consistent. So like we say that we have the style that Cloudflare needs to be capitalized, but does that apply to all situations? So as you can see on the left, one is working, on the right, that actually isn't what we want. Similarly, it's just a lot of things of like, okay, like what do we actually care to enforce? You could make a lot of changes, but going through and reviewing something like heading punctuation, heading casing, the question that you have to ask yourself is, where is the pain? Me fixing this, is it just in alignment with our style guide, or is it improving the user experience? I think the biggest takeaway and the most like clear value of Hyperlint that we've seen is fixing anchor links. It is one of the more painful things, like in a repo of like 5,000 plus pages. At any given time, I think we had around 400 broken anchor links, and it is nothing but toil going in and fixing these. Hyperlint is an agentic fix. This is actually awesome. Our team loved handing this off. You can just check it, boom, 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 you're good. And just leading people to the better experience overall in our docs. And so I think some key takeaways from this AI section that we've learned, we haven't had good luck having contributors interact with AI. It's just hard when bot hallucinates. I think there's more than we are doing in alerting. I think there's a lot there. I really need to spend some time diving into Manny's docs as tests around that. I think the best automations are ones you can clearly validate. Just sometimes like prose linting, kind of the bottom part, is hard, and it's really hard to see, okay, this changed, but did that change the meaning of this paragraph? And ties into a little bit of like, I need to spend more time on this, but I think validation is becoming a lot bigger part of our role as tech writers. And I need to spend some more time thinking about it, but that thought is definitely there. And then finally, the prose linting, especially with Veil and AI, like can be very hard, and it also kind of forces you to think like, what do I care about? And I think if the one thing that you take away from my talk is this: you have a style guide, yes, but what is painful enough to actually fix? And I think having that approach and thinking about democratizing, documenting, automating, and AI, like that is a helpful place to start. Where's the pain, and what value would it provide your team? And with that, like, thank you so much for your time. I have some links here. I think I've dropped several links in the chat. And again, like our repo is open source, so feel free to feel free to grab stuff, steal stuff, look at it for inspiration. I know that I've done that a lot with the just open source community. And then also, if you want to reach out or talk more, have questions, my email is Kody@Cloudflare.com. And then also LinkedIn, I am Kody with a K. And then, yeah, it looks like we have a couple questions that I can follow up with in chat.